Okay, so much for my last video for the day. I think you need to hear this. A bit of chatter over the airwaves. This is rather concerning. I'll turn it up a bit so you can hear it. This is a DEFCON alert. Iran prepares biggest missile launch in history. Russia bombers airborne. Hope you're ready for shit to hit the fan.
This is U.S. Strategic Command walking emergency action messages, a very unusual one. 21 characters. Impossible, of course, to decrypt. But this could suggest that we're seeing major strategic activity tonight. We do know that Poland has elevated its level of readiness, and it has scrambled some jets because Russia right now is laying it on thick in Ukraine, many bombers in the air. It could be pertinent to that. It could also, of course, be the endless airlift that is continuing to flow in the Middle East. But this is a highly unusual message according to seasoned OSINT aggregators and HF listeners. This is very unusual, guys, okay? So something big is about to go down. This is not indicative of a exercise because apparently these characters that they're using are not commonly associated with that. In addition to that, we also know that there is no exercise happening. There is going to be a nuclear simulated strike conducted by France and Poland that is going to take place soon, but that is probably a little far out, and this is likely not pertaining to that. So I'm going to try to elucidate this very amorphous World War III quagmire we find ourselves in here around the world. And it's going to be hard for me to triage the information because we have so much stuff to talk about. It is really unreal. We have a massive salvo of drones and missiles heading into Russia at the time of making this video. We have the Russians seemingly preparing along the borders with Kherson on that edge of the river, quite possibly getting ready to do some sort of offensive in that direction. We have all kinds of stratotankers in the air. We have the Iranians threatening the largest missile barrage in history. This is from a reputable and notable Iranian associated account, I should say, and they claim that Iran is prepared upon observing signs of an impending strike to launch the largest missile barrage in history against the occupied territories and certain U.S. allied Arab countries. Now, those indicators that they're seeing, well, they're pretty obvious because we know that right now at Israeli airports, it is loaded with stratotankers. In fact, there's about 223 stratotankers that are available and operational in the theater, not in the air right now, but across Europe and the Middle East. And each one of those, of course, can refuel multiple airplanes.
By the way, you know that I think that's going on with all these oil refineries blowing up? I think it's hacking. I wouldn't mind betting Iran's hacking. We've sent troops over there. We made ourselves a fucking target, didn't we? Should have left it alone, but nah. Ooh. Should have left it alone.
So something big is fitting to go down. We also have the expiration of Donald Trump's ability to wage the war unilaterally without congressional approval. That is going to expire soon. So the authority to use military force is going to come to an end in the next week. And because they like doing these things on the weekends, so not to spook the markets, we can surmise that it very well may happen this weekend, because now we just had the addition of another aircraft carrier strike group in the Middle East. Take a look at this naval buildup around Iran right now. So we got to talk about that. We have mass evacuation orders from Russia, from China, to get their people out of Iran. We have to talk about the energy crisis. We'll talk about that in more depth, and why this going green is only going to make the oil crisis much, much worse. We need to talk about what the potential targets are for an Iranian counterattack, because that's going to factor in come Monday if they do pull the trigger this weekend. And many other oddities and entities is what we are going to discuss, including, and not limited to, Canada becoming a police state, allowing police officers to walk around with what I think are automatics. Maybe they're semi-autos. Either way, this is to keep us safe in Toronto, okay, from terrorists. And they're putting up these mobile surveillance posts that have acoustic detection systems. Incredible stuff. Absolutely incredible. We have wild, wacky weather. We had a blizzard here today. It was 25 degrees Celsius just 2 days ago. And today we had a blizzard, and we got about 1.5 feet of snow. Absolutely incredible. We are that blue dot right there. The only place in the planet, really, that is seeing record cold temperatures. Everywhere else, record warm temperatures, including the Midwest and elsewhere, where they are seeing drought-like conditions and very likely are going to add to the food shortage woes, no doubt. So I want to just kind of dive in here and try to tackle these issues one by one. Again, at the time of me.
See how I don't keep myself in a microcosm? I look all over the world to people that are reputable for having good intel. Because anything that's not intel isn't intel. It's just blah, blah, blah. Intel has to be verifiable. And it has to be reputable. It has to be reliable. Nate's pretty reliable. So the same thing that's happening here is happening in China. It's happening in Canada.
In this video, there's no elevated movement of stratotankers in the air just yet. There's been about 6 or so at any given moment in the theater, but nothing massive. But we should expect that to pick up if they are in fact going to pull the trigger over the weekend here, which in my opinion seems very, very likely. But oftentimes I'm usually about a week early on these things, so it may not be until next weekend. Burundi had debunked some claims today that the Iranian foreign minister was going to Pakistan to meet with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and Burundi basically says that the Iranian foreign minister will not hold any negotiations with the Trump regime in Islamabad and merely convey Iran's considerations and views regarding the end of the war to the Pakistani side. This meeting is a general response to Asim Munir's trip to Tehran, who is the military chief of Pakistan, and I've been informed that no negotiations with any Americans are planned during this visit. Well, it does still sound like there's some level of contact there, that they're going to potentially be passing a message on, and then he is going to Muscat afterwards, which is in Oman, and then Russia. So, usually when the Iranian foreign minister is away, shit hits the fan. So I would not be surprised if it happened this weekend. Now, this is very interesting. So, in addition to the EU forming its own military bloc outside of NATO, so not to be reliant on the United States in the invocation of Article 5, France is also wanting to extend its nuclear umbrella to various allies, including Poland. And they're about to practice nuclear strikes on Russia. A UK-led joint expedition forces, meanwhile, will reportedly practice the naval blockade and seizure of the Kaliningrad exclave. So all of this is happening at the same time. This, while Russia is getting lit up left and right by Ukrainian drones that are allegedly using Baltic airspace. So France and Poland are preparing joint military exercises simulating conventional and nuclear strikes on Russia and Belarus. This is according to Polish media. This is not being framed as a standard NATO drill. So this is going to be outside the scope of NATO, and the cooperation is reportedly being organized outside of normal NATO bureaucracy in order to allow faster decision making. The drills follow a shift in French nuclear strategy, and Macron is suggesting that extending France's nuclear umbrella to several allies, not limited to Poland, but also Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Greece, and others. And Donald Trump, Tusk, is also saying that Poland is negotiating with France and other European allies on an advanced nuclear deterrence program. Basically, they will play host to nuclear weapons, along with Finland, who has also recently adjusted or is in the process of adjusting its nuclear posture. So they're proposing legal changes to lower the barriers that are associated with allied nuclear cooperation, meaning they will play host to nuclear weapons and transport, store, and possibly use them in defensive situations, but they're not going to build or acquire their own nuclear weapons. And so you have all these things happening at the same time while Russia is only scrabbling 4 bombers, which seems a little flaccid of a response, if you ask me, considering how much they've been getting lit up lately. They're claiming that they're building 1,000 drones a day. I don't know if that's true. I guess we're going to find out, because we've yet to see them use 1,000 drones for probably a few weeks now. I'm talking about, in one day. They shoot about 200 to 300 or 400 every day. Now, in addition to all of this, it's important to remember, many people have forgotten that right before the Iran war started, the New START Treaty expired. This is the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which was originally brokered, I think, in the 90s? And it was between the Russians and the Americans in order to reduce their nuclear stockpiles. And so that's expired. We have no more Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Around the same time that tonight, part of the reason why they might be squawking these emergency action messages is not only is Russia getting ready to put bombers in the air, but they're also possibly going to fire intermediate range ballistic missiles, also known as the Orezhnik missile, and that would elicit such a response from STRATCOM, because they have to presume that it could be potentially nuclear armed. Normally the Russians would notify the Americans in advance of these things, especially in light of the now non-existent treaty. During the treaties, they would notify each other if they were doing tests, or if they were even putting an IRBM and sending it towards Ukraine, because of course the Europeans would have to presume that it was intended for them, even though there was a very low likelihood of that. It would elevate the DEFCON levels, and everybody would have an itchy trigger figure at that point. So we have no more Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, ended by Trump in 2019. We have the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which is gone, so we got anti-ballistic missiles systems everywhere. The Open Skies Treaty collapsed, so no more overflights to survey adversarial nations to make sure that they're not up to something they're not supposed to be up to. We have allegations that the Chinese were doing nuclear tests just earlier in the year. That was from 2020, that they claimed that the Chinese had conducted this nuclear test. China denies the allegation. Nonetheless, the U.S. is using it as justification to recommence their own nuclear weapons testing. And of course, we have the hinder and the claim that the United States government has put on potassium iodide stockpiles with miscellaneous companies. This, of course, is a medication to prevent radiation sickness and block the uptake of radioactive iodine through the thyroid gland. So the U.S. government has procured all of several companies' potassium iodide, and I've talked about this a couple weeks ago, and we have some at CanadianPreparedness.com. It's one of the few things we have left, but we do still have some. If you wanted to pick some up, I'll post a link in the description below. But that's obviously a point of concern. In addition to that, they've been procuring acute radiation sickness medication for a long time. So these are the flight paths of the drones that were sent out today, and you know where they're heading. they're heading to more oil tanks, ports, pipelines, drilling rigs. That's where they're going. And it's looking like it's going to be a big night, okay? So right now the Russians are allegedly amassing forces on the opposite side of the Dnieper River in around the Kherson region, presumably to do some sort of land attack, because the Russians have been very tepid as of late with respect to their response to all of these attacks by Ukraine. But Putin has that grin on his face that he's planning something big, and he even says as much. He made an allusion yesterday to some big day that is coming in the not so distant future when big things are going to happen, and how he knows how this is all going to end, okay? Suggesting that there is a big aero maneuver that is about to take place in the not so distant future. Now, I think I already talked about this. The Iranians are claiming that they're going to do the largest missile barrage in history, which is saying a lot, because of course they were the ones who broke the previous record for the largest missile barrage, and I believe that was Operation True Promise 1, if I'm not mistaken, which was the largest to date still. Possibly it was during the initial phases of the 12-day war. That one might have even been bigger, but they've already broken that threshold many times over. And what's concerning right now, and why the pressure is on for Donald Trump, even though the Iran war has bipartisan support, the margin is starting to close. But of course, the Republicans run the House, the Senate, and of course the POTUS. And so that means that they very likely will remain in this war until the end. But there's also a few Democrats that are voting in favor of the war. So it's pretty much a done deal. But Trump needs congressional approval after a certain period of time, and that period of time is fast approaching, okay? I believe he has another week until we're at the 60-day mark. So the president is able to not declare war, but he can unilaterally engage in a, let's just call it what it is, a war of aggression for 60 days, and he can do so without congressional authorization. But based on the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the 60-day limit is about to be up. And unless there is a national emergency, which creates the need for the United States to attack Iran, and you can't really make that argument yet, although I'm sure that's a very ambiguously worded piece of legalese that I'm sure you could twist and say, oh yeah, they pose a risk to us because they looked at us the wrong way. We need a declaration of war to happen after this 60 days. And if that's the case, then of course that opens the potential floodgates to what we're seeing foment right here. So 223 tankers present across the Middle East and European theater that are at the disposal of the U.S. and Israeli Air Force in order to carry out future operations. And we also have a mass evacuation call from multiple countries to get their people out of Iran. I don't have the exact list of countries in front of me here, but I know there was many that went beyond Russia and China today that reminded people who are still in those countries that they need to evacuate while they still can. There may be brief windows where the Iranian airports are still open, and apparently they're talking about resuming international flights on Saturday. And remember, this war started when commercial airspace was open because they wanted that element of surprise. They risked all of those passenger flights, and this is something which I'm sure if a person wanted to audit how this war was prosecuted, they would go back to day one. And they would look at how the United States and Israel primarily had initiated the war while commercial flights were in the air, knowing full well that Iran's air defense could have mistaken one of those commercial flights as a fighter jet. And the reason why they did this, they essentially used those passenger flights as human shields. So I would not be surprised if they didn't want the Iranian airspace to open again, and just to create a bunch of confusion and diversions so that when they did do another kinetic strike, they would have those human shields in the air for at least an hour or so. And you can see on the flight radar time lapse. I don't have it with me. But as soon as that war became obvious, immediately all of the flights just deviated from Iran's airspace. They just did hard turns out of the airspace. It was something to see. Now we also have the arrival of the USS George H.W. Bush into the Arabian Sea today. That means we now have 3 aircraft carrier strike groups, in addition to a presence of equipment that is much bigger than what we had initially. And so yesterday, when I was interviewing Larry Johnson, he had made a good point that after 45 to 60 days, a lot of these troops need resupply. That they're, once they're deployed, the pilots, of course, and all of the maintenance needs of these various pieces of equipment, they have about 45 to 60 days. But what we're seeing is an airlift which dwarfs that of the initial war deployment, which means that they're going above and beyond. That this cannot simply be explained by routine maintenance and resupply, that there's something else they're getting ready for here. I think it's going to happen this weekend. I didn't stake my reputation on it, but I made a very bold prediction a few days ago when I said 72 hours, which would put us kind of in tomorrow. But typically, when I'm so convinced of something like that, I get all of the data points right, but usually my prognosis is just slightly premature, so it might not come until next week. But the only reason why I think it has to happen this weekend is because of this. It's because Trump is running out of time. That 60-day window is expiring. Not that I don't think he can get it deferred once again, or that Congress will, in fact, approve him and empower him with those war authorizations. So we have a lot of naval activity. Yemen would likely be activated in the case of an all-out attack on Iran. Remember, they're saying that they're going to do the largest ever barrage of missiles, and that's going to lead to a major oil crisis throughout the region. Let me just see if I have the map here that shows all the vulnerable infrastructural targets across the Middle East. So in Bahrain, you're going to see refineries hit. Obviously, you have coastal water dependency, so you have those desalination plants. In Kuwait, you're going to have oil export infrastructure, which has already been significantly degraded, mind you, but more so coastal desalination. You already have a lot of the wells that have been shut in throughout this region, and oil, offshore export islands and terminals, offshore gas from Qatar. You have the Saudi Arabian Yanbu pipeline and their terminal and ports there. So these are all going to be major targets, and that's what they're referring to. And of course, that's going to lead to a huge problem, because according to Chris Martenson, and I'm going to post a link in the description below to a video that he just released before this one. Great video, because he breaks down the true oil shortfall, which he puts at about 1.6 billion barrels that we are now in deficit as compared to what is typical this time of year. And what that means, I lost my, okay, well, I wanted to show you basically the deficit in the Hormuz transits, but that's really neither here nor there, okay? Because what you need to know is this, is that GDP and energy use are tightly correlated. It's an immutable relationship, and it's almost a one-to-one correlation. The more energy, the more work, the more economic output. And so if a nation has a reduction in energy, they're likely going to have a reduction in work, and that's going to lead to a reduction in economic output. And so what that means is that if our economy is green, and we're genuinely at a deficit, and our economy is green because they're actively suppressing the price of oil in the futures market to kick the can down the road, this means that demand is staying the same. And this is very problematic. Everybody's looking at the stock market thinking they're rich, and they're looking at oil prices thinking they're subdued. Meanwhile, we're in a 1.6 billion barrel deficit and growing by around 13 million per day, around 440 million per month. And I think that's going to grow because Iran contributes a little bit of that, not a huge amount, but if they have to shut in their wells, and if they continue to enforce this blockade, then those other nations have to shut in their wells. So the long tail effects of this become more and more dire the longer this continues. And so assuming this conflict stops today, we're still at a 1.6 billion deficit, which I believe is vastly exceeds the energy reserves and stockpiles of all the nations combined when you don't factor in China. So what this means is that everybody thinks they're rich because the S&P 500 hit a new record this week, which is nonsensical in light of the fact that the price of real energy, the spot price of oil, is so high. And so this is going to drive more demand when there is less and less supply. And what that means is that when they can no longer hold the beach ball underwater, it is going to shoot up and it is going to cause a massive collapse. You guys got to go and watch Chris Martenson over at Peak Prosperity's video. It's very, very enlightening information, stuff that you need to know about the coming energy crisis. He breaks it all down. Now, Pete Hegseth today was crying about, let's just hear what he has to say.
It's also worth saying, this should not be America's fight alone. We barely use the Strait of Hormuz as a country. Our energy doesn't flow through there, and we have plenty of energy. Just look at the new global Congo line headed to Texas.
So Chris breaks all that down, why he debunks all that, but the thing that I want to address here is that he says it's everybody else's problem, it's not our problem. Well, for one, obviously they're the ones who started the war. There was freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz prior to the war. The only reason why the Iranians are forced to use it as leverage because you pose an existential threat to them. But above and beyond that, the real thing here is that the United States has been entrusted with something. And I'm not really speaking to the people themselves, I'm talking to, the people who are in charge. You have been entrusted with policing the global maritime corridors. Okay, you've gotten to be the global police service. And in exchange for that service, in exchange for you watching over the waterways and making sure that nobody kills each other and nations, you're kind of the primary enforcer, the enforcement arm of the United Nations, essentially. And of course, if you abuse that power, then that's a breach of the contract because the world entered into an agreement with the United States after World War II, and it said, we will buy your debt if you, number one, don't be an asshole, and you make sure you ensure the security of the waterways. Don't start wars that compromise the security of the waterways and then say, hey, all you guys who don't have the golden credit card, the ability to print endless amounts of debt like we do because we outsource all that debt, well, you shouldn't be abusing that power, and that's what's happening right now. So this is the arrangement that the world has with the United States. The U.S. can print as much money as it wants because the market's propped up by foreign purchasing of equities and treasuries. That's what keeps the market elevated, foreign investment, people buying dollars. And in exchange for that, the U.S. maintains order in the world and is the global hegemon. And they get to print a lot of money. Now, is this going to have detrimental effects on their industrial base? Yes, but they still get to import a lot of cheap products that are made by second and third world wage slaves. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that has been the arrangement thus far. We get cheap stuff from people who are willing to work for less, and at the same time we get endless amounts of credit. And we now want both of those things. We now want the world to police itself and to give us money and buy our debt for no reason. And the world is saying, well, that time is basically up. And so this is what Pete Hegseth doesn't understand about the broader geostrategic and macroeconomic picture. I mean, he seems like a smart enough guy that he should be able to know that, but perhaps he's just pretending that he doesn't know that. But who knows? It's very possible that sometimes these people are smart in one domain and not others. So anyways, that's what's going on in the world right now. People are decoupling, and the U.S. wants its cake and to eat it too. They want to be able to sell their dollars and continue to amass debt, but not fulfill their end of the bargain and maintain global order and not be a belligerent. So, yeah, in terms of the satellite picture, so what we're seeing right now is apparently there's a way that they can detect where American satellites are looking. I don't know the science behind it. This is according to Russian Rybar. They're saying that the places of interest primarily right now are uranium mining sites, underground missile bases, and specific ones, uranium enrichment plants, and 3 islands in particular that are currently the fixation of U.S. satellites. So does that mean that there is going to be some sort of attack on those sites? It's very possible. Usually these things happen late Friday night, so I guess we're going to see. It looks like there's a major shortfall of jet fuel, and this is going to be very problematic for Europe, who right now is highly dependent on jet fuel coming from the Middle East. And as you can see here, down from the peak, probably around 60% of what it was. So we are way down here right now. Okay? So don't be planning on taking any trips anytime soon if you're in Europe, or anywhere for that matter, because these are global markets. This is rather ominous. This is a scene yesterday out of Washington, D.C., and it looks like foreshadowing in a way. It looks like a scene out of Civil War. I believe it was just a fire, like a bus was burning or something, but it just seemed a little inauspicious considering the circumstances of what's going on right now, that there would be smoke in Washington, D.C. I just think that that's a little strange. You know, sometimes the universe aligns and shares us these signs. Now, we also have this argument here that I hear often. Iran war complicates contingency plans to defend Taiwan, some U.S. officials say. Now, what is the purpose of this headline? I believe this is New York Times or Washington Post, because this is an argument you often hear. We're running out of weapons. Now, this is very similar to the Pfizer's and the Moderna scares of COVID. What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to create a market for something, and there's a lot of money at play here. Even if Trump and Israel, which is unlikely, wanted to extricate themselves from this conflict, there would be a lot of financial pressure to stay the course. Why? Because, of course, they want to spend a lot more money on weapons. That's just all there is to it. Okay? It is a racket, and it's an oligarchy, and as such, the military companies, the industrial base, have a vested interest in keeping the war going. So to pump the stocks, number one, that's what an argument like this, we're running out of stuff, we got to build up our stockpiles with brand new stuff. It also, in this headline right here, it frames the objective as defense, right? We want to defend Taiwan, but a lot of the weapons they're talking about here are standoff munitions, like the Tomahawk missiles and the JSOMs, which are offensive weapons. Now, yes, it's true that they need more Patriots, they need more THAADs, and other air defense platforms. They're running low, allegedly, because, you know, I'm still not very convinced that that's the case, but let's just say they are, okay? They're rebranding this whole Taiwan mission as defensive, but what they're really asking for is offensive weapons. So what they're saying is that they are going to need offensive weapons to fight the Chinese, and we all know that has nuclear implications. This also is normalizing the commitment of Taiwan's defense, saying that if there is a war that breaks out or if they're blockaded, that we will come to their defense. That sets that precedent. They're also trying to bait China, perhaps to act prematurely for some reason. Because why would you publish a story like this unless it is going to, because this would entice the Chinese to say, maybe we should act now while their supplies are depleted so that they can't effectively, defend Taiwan. And what this, of course, would do is induce some kind of complacency and get the other side to underestimate the capabilities of the United States, which for all we know, they could still have really deep pockets, and they're just pretending that they're running out of stuff. Okay, we often hear Trump say, oh yeah, we got limitless everything. You know, I'm inclined to actually believe him in that respect, that there's more than a lot of people are claiming. Because remember, they've been spending money on this stuff for decades, and as they have been using it, that's true, and as our industrial base is paltry compared to the Chinese capability, I presume that they have a lot more than they're saying. If you look at some of the sheer size of U.S. ammunition depots in the United States, and some of these yards where they store their tanks and stuff, just like, these things are massive, okay? Remember, they gave, 39 Abrams tanks of their 8,000 that they had to Ukraine? So I think they're hoarding stuff. And they're also framing this as a logistical problem. Not an ethical problem, but the problem is logistical. That we don't have enough stuff to continue the war with Iran. We shouldn't engage in a war of convenience and aggression against Iran. So those are the reasons why I think that argument is kind of bullshit. Now, this is something interesting coming out of Canada. Remember, they're trying to take away all the guns. We're going to have John Carpe in, who's a libertarian-style lawyer here in Canada, on Monday to talk about all of the bills that the Canadian government is passing to basically erode our civil liberties. And this is interesting. So this is the most comical thing I've ever seen in my life. I thought this was, an episode of The Onion. It's comical, but I mean that in the most irreverent way possible, because this is very scary, if I'm being brutally honest. So they're talking in this video about how they're going to have police who are walking around with what look to be automatic capable weapons. They might not be automatics, or full auto, I should say. They might be they're obviously semi-autos, but semi-automatic rifles we'll assume, quite possibly full automatic rifles, and they're going to be walking around Toronto, and just happily walking around, keeping people safe from terrorists. Well, the last I heard, there hasn't been a major terrorist attack in some time. Now, I just find this amusing, don't you? Because this goes back to what I was saying in one of my videos a few months ago, where I showed you a picture of a cop in the 1970s, and he's got his pistol on his holster, he's wearing a blue shirt, no body armor, no shit like that, okay? And juxtaposed with the fact that during that period of time, Canadians could own automatic firearms. Now, despite that huge discrepancy of power and monopoly of force, there were much less criminality and mass shootings, even for that matter, during that period of time. Now, fast forward to the future today, they're disarming all of us, and you have this shit going on. And if you believe that this is a good thing, or it's not a big deal, and they're not trying to acclimate and prime you, the same government who's trying to take away, look at, they're smiling, and I guarantee you most of the interactions that these guys have with the public, it's not some happy exchange. Okay, maybe the kid runs up, hey mommy, I want a picture, or whatever, but they don't understand the insidious aspect of this, right? Cops just smiling, I mean, they've had this in Canadian airports for a long time. Yeah, we're going to fist bump. We're just trying to be friendly. We're just here, take pictures with the kids, the soon-to-be Gestapo, right? The ostrich murderers. Everything is fine. So, I don't know, man. This is our version of ICE coming to fruition, only it is for citizens, not just illegals, but citizens. And this is a trial run, okay? Again, it's going to start off gentle, nice, pictures with the kids, but eventually there's a reason behind all of this. This is mission creep. This is very pernicious, and I would encourage people not to just put the rose-colored glasses on with this. Okay, it's great if there's a mass shooter. Maybe it'll prevent mass shootings. But again, it goes back to, why the hell do the police get a monopoly of force while they're trying to take away all of our firearms?
Wake up, people. Wake the fuck up. Hello, McFly. Sound familiar?
Is that what we want? Armed cops everywhere? Well, we're all disarmed and all we have is like lever actions and pump action shotguns? Sounds pretty fucked up if you ask me. And now they're rolling out these mobile surveillance and they couldn't be, look at this, the mainstream media couldn't be happier about this. I'm so happy. What is this, the OPP? Oh, this is just great. Acoustic detection. It can detect gunshots. It can watch people from miles away. Probably got a thermal optic. Look how happy they are. The good little panoptical caged little rats. Oh my goodness. So anyways, I don't want to get a copyright infringement. I warned you guys about Intel. I told you it was going to pop. Remember I said because Taiwan makes all the chips 90% and Intel was the only American-based producer of semiconductors, they were going to pop. Well, here we go. Pop 4x since I was talking about it. That was the one company that I pretty much knew was going to pop in addition to gold, silver, oil, and Intel. There's a few others, but again, I don't want to be giving financial advice. I just think that that one company that's making that game that's coming out later this year, yeah, you might want to look into that because people are sleeping on it. Anyways, winter wheat conditions are not looking that good. I actually think that when Grand Theft Auto 6 comes out, you know, that's when they'll probably do the shit hit the fan thing because they need something to distract everybody with, right? Winter wheat not looking good because there's a massive drought that's unfolding in the United States. And it's looking like it's going to get worse because we've got Super El Nino coming our way. You wouldn't know it if you lived in my neck of the woods because we are right here. Now,
I'll leave that at that. See what it pays to get your information from all over the place? The same thing's happening everywhere, just at different stages here and there. We might have part A, C and X, and somewhere else has B, D and R, hypothetical letters. But we all get everything eventually. Is it starting to make sense to you yet? You see, for it to make sense, you can't think about what's going on around the world like a sane person. Because these people are clearly insane. And they have to have narcissistic, grandiose people with inferiority complexes who like to feel like they are superior to do their bidding for them. You know, any interaction with the cops, you only got to talk to them. They're fuckwits. They like to get feminists now for magistrates because, you know, they cause feminists. Oh no, I'm not doing myself any favours here. I know. I don't care. I really don't.